So last night I did get out and go see the most recent John Wick movie that is, of course, not a John Wick movie. It is a movie from the world of John Wick entitled Ballerina, starring Ana de Armas. And it also brings back a lot of the cast from past John Wick movies. You get Ian McShane as Winston. Lance Reddick is back for, I believe this was his last role before his tragic passing, which was extremely sad. But we do get to see him in this movie. We do get to see Keanu Reeves as John Wick. And look, I had a lot of fun with this movie. And this is saying something given the fact that I didn't like The Continental that much. I tapped out after one episode. And I love John Wick 1 through 3. John Wick 4, I thought for my taste, was on the gratuitous side as far as the runtime and the absolute length of the fight sequences, but it even started to get that way in 3 to me. But I had a lot of fun in this movie, and there are a few things that I didn't like about it, but I think the number one question that I think a lot of people would have about this movie is, given the fact that they took this in the direction of bringing on a female protagonist, given the state of Hollywood these days, people are going to at least ask the question, is the character of Eve a Mary Sue? And I think unequivocally not. She gets her ass kicked way too much in this movie for her to be a Mary Sue. It's a point that she has very much the same knockdown, drag out, absolutely brutal fights that John Wick has. To the point that it's beyond the realm of believability for any human to be able to take that level of punishment. But of course, I believe that went out to the window early in the film. I believe it probably went out the window in John Wick 1 when he falls off the balcony of the nightclub and he falls on his back with his Glock 26 tucked between on his back. He's got it holstered on his back and he falls on his back and you're like, okay, his back is broken in that movie, but he gets up and moves on. But it really went out the window in John Wick 3, when he goes off the roof and survives. So you do have to stretch the bounds of believability when it comes to that in this film. But one thing that they do go out of their way to do, at the very least, is they go to talk early on in her training about the differences between men and women in fighting. She gets her ass kicked a bunch when she's training. She has to do a lot of work to get up to speed with everything. And the one training them says, improvise, for the women, says you'll always be smaller, you'll always be weaker, you have to improvise, adapt, cheat, lean into your strengths. And the other thing that they did is they worked to make her character to at least build the sympathy around her, or keep her off the hook of making her a villain in a unique way, which was that there's a scene early on, and I'm going to get into spoilers here, where she's in the final stage of her training, where they bring in another assassin, and they both have to, there's a weapon disassembled in front of both of them, and they have to reassemble the weapons. And the idea is whoever gets there first is going to be the one who gets to go on. At this point, she has not killed anybody. And what happens is the woman and her both start assembling their weapons. She assembles her weapon first and points it at her. She does not take the shot at her. But then what you see is the other one tries to continue and finish what she was doing, presumably because she was going to then kill Eve, which then gives Eve the license to shoot and kill her, and you as the audience the license to be like, look, even if you're not just here for the pure fun of what John Wick is, which is, assassins killing people at insane distances with handguns, it allows you to empathize with her, and you don't have to see her as the villain because presumably that other character was going to kill her. And then, so they work hard to make sure that that she is not a Mary Sue. She did not get to where she was without failing. And certainly it's reinforced throughout the film. Every time she gets in a fight, this is not the type of thing where she just disposes of bad guys one after the other. People are brutal with her, and she is brutal with them right back. That is not always believable, but a ton of fun. So the plot is essentially, she is part of the Ruska Roma, just like John Wick was, part of that clan. And it's a revenge story involving her father's death, who was also trained by them, or who was also trained, and she has to go after a cult of assassins, which she later finds out was one that her father was excommunicated from, and they killed her father when she was younger, and she notices this by a scar on the wrist of one of the assassins who is sent to kill her dad. So it was, I mean, it's exactly what it needed to be. It needed its own revenge plot, much like John Wick had him with the loss of his wife, leading to the last gift his wife ever gave him being killed by, you know, the Russian mob and then stealing his car. That is his kind of call to action in that movie. And Eve's call to action is, of course, what happened to her father when she was younger. And then she's reintroduced to that symbol later in life, which sets her down the path. There's a lot of really interesting, and I could be imagining this, if I'm being completely honest, but there were a lot of visual callbacks to John Wick that were done in a subtle way that I really liked. One I'm sure was on purpose, and the other one could have just been me kind of reading too much into it. The one was that the Chancellor, who is the main bad guy who you see at the beginning, he kind of looks like this weird mix of Winston and Marcus, so like a mixture of Ian McShane and Willem Dafoe. And, of course, the more realistic one is that they dress her outside of the initial, her first action scene, like her first real mission, which I thought was my favorite in the movie, which I'll get into a little bit later, where she's wearing a dress. She spends the majority of the movie in a muted black pantsuit, and she's got the matted black hair that's pushed behind the ears. And it's designed to be visually similar to what John Wick looks like in this movie. And of course you do get to see that because he does appear in the film. And I thought it was, I'm assuming that was done on purpose, but it was great visual storytelling because it's supposed to kind of allow you to see him in her, and it's part of the same universe. The same thing is also done, of course, with, especially in the early scenes, there is the John Wick style of the kind of, like, the improbable amount of neon lights that are everywhere in a room. In the nightclub, it makes perfect sense, but in a lot of places, it's like, how could one room have so many neon lights? It doesn't seem to make any sense. But it kind of gets away from that later on, especially as she goes out on her revenge tour. It gets away from that overly stylized look in the buildings that they had in the original John Wick movies, which is good. I think that it needs to find a happy balance between calling back to the visual storytelling of the series and finding its own path forward and being its own thing. The action is, of course, the one thing you need to really use as a visual through line, as a story through line, and how to connect it to the John Wick universe, because the John Wick films are such a unique fighting style, such a unique camera style for the way everything is done. So that worked. So I enjoyed that. So there were some things that I didn't like about the movie. So mainly it was like, it's like with a lot of these movies, it still felt like the villain was a tad underdeveloped. Despite the fact that it was properly explained at the beginning. It's not that it wasn't properly explained. It's just they do a good thing by making sure that you spend as much time as possible with the main character, because they need you to get to know her, and she is the focus of this movie. And they kind of nerf the ability for the villain to grow, which is fine in this movie, but they also do it to Norman Reedus, who makes an appearance in this film. And as I'm sure a lot of people, if you're a fan of The Walking Dead or just the actor in general, you probably assumed he might get more screen time than you thought, but he's really only on screen for the blink of an eye. So I in a way, I didn't necessarily feel Eve's pain the way that I felt John Wick's pain in his stoicism, because I think fundamentally, in a lot of ways, men and women process grief and things like that differently. So she is, for the most part, stoic in this movie in a lot of ways. There's some really interesting reuse of like female screams that they use when she's fighting that doesn't even necessarily look like her character would emote in that way, even though it makes perfect sense. She's exerting physically. But there's just a bit of too much stoicism for her that I feel makes it harder for you to connect with her pain, despite the fact that you get to see why at the very beginning of the movie. Mainly it's because when John Wick, with what happens to John Wick, he is kind of, his pain is acute, meaning that what happens to him happens right then. and then he goes off on his revenge tour right away. What happens to Eve happens as a child, and then she goes off on a revenge tour when she is reminded of it years later after her training. So they underused Norman Reedus. The other thing that I thought was a little bit interesting is they introduced the term Kikimara, which is supposed to be like their version of Baba Yaga, which is, of course, the boogeyman, which is, of course, what everybody knows John Wick as. And what I feel like the problem was is they introduced it earlier in the movie, like at the very beginning when they're being trained. And that didn't make much sense to me, when I felt like what should have happened is she should have received this mantle, this title after the end mission, because for her, in a lot of ways, the final mission in this very German this very German-seeming assassin cult in this very German-seeming town, or French Alps, or whatever the hell it was. Could have been Switzerland, for all I know. It's snowy. She has her own version of what is essentially John Wick's impossible mission from the original films, and I felt like she should have received that title as becoming her own version of the boogeyman for her, though that's not how they describe it. After that. I think it would have lent into the lore in a way that didn't feel like a writer felt like they had to get it in as soon as possible so they could remind everybody that they were watching a John Wick movie. But there are also a ton of stuff that I like, and I really do love the pacing of this movie. Maybe it's just because I was at Mission Impossible last weekend, and it felt like Mission Impossible at 2 hours and 51 minutes felt like it was a whole lot of just endless exposition between two major set pieces, meaning like the Sevastopol sub and then the biplane in the countdown at the end. This film does start slower than like John Wick 2, 3, and 4, but that is because you do need to get caught up to speed, much in the way that John Wick 1 starts a tad slower, because you're building the world, you're establishing the characters. But once the pace starts picking up, I really did feel like the action scenes were just the right length to get you from scene to scene without it killing the pace. One of the issues I had with John Wick 4, and even in a way, John Wick 3 at the very end, was that the action scenes, which are unbelievably incredible, they are cinematic, they are awe-inspiring, but they have this tendency to kind of overstay their welcome. Because, look, this is a movie made by stuntmen for people who love to watch stunts. So the fact that it would get gratuitous isn't hard to believe at all. But this movie kept those action scenes to just the right amount to move the pace and the story forward. I think they did a really good job using the character of John Wick here. They tie him in to her life early on in her training through a scene from John Wick 2, I believe. I believe it's from John Wick 2. When he goes to see Angelica Houston's character, the director. And she's in training at that time. She's one of the ballerinas, opposite the wrestlers that are also at that school. And I thought that there was many great... So the thing with John Wick is what you worry about is they do end up coming to confrontation later in a way where he is sent to stop her from... In the movie, the Ruska Roma and the very German assassin cult have had this centuries long truce, or at least understanding to not get into each other's business. But she has, of course, broken her promise to the Ruska Roma, and she's gone after this group. So there's like a political battle going on between the chancellor and the director, and the director sends John Wick to stop her. And what I worried about, and what I'm sure a lot of people worried about, is that they were going to use that as an opportunity to nerf the John Wick character, which they do not. He is every bit as terrifying as he is supposed to be, and it felt as if the director of the movie and the writers knew that, look, all of this franchise is kind of predicated upon the legend of this character. We cannot have him sacrificed for the sake of elevating this new character, which, let's face it, even if this movie does well, she's not John Wick. She is merely another piece of the chessboard in the John Wick universe. You cannot sacrifice your main character for that. But they've also done a fantastic job in this film franchise of showing that John Wick is not infallible. He just keeps going. He just keeps fighting, and that's what makes him so terrifying in a lot of ways. So They don't nerf him in any way, shape, or form, at least in my opinion. I do actually think that there was probably room to make him make the fight between them even more a bit one-sided and have him come on top a little bit easier. But you've just spent an hour and 40 minutes building up this character. You have to find a middle ground, which makes sense. The action set pieces are fantastic. Everyone is going to be talking to you about the grenade scene. With Frank, who is like my favorite character now. That guy was hilarious. Can I be frank? They're going to talk about the grenade scene, and they're going to talk about the flamethrower scene. But really, to me, there was two that I thought were fantastic. Even more than that, even if they weren't the same type of spectacular, which is her very first mission in the film is where she's sent to protect a character in a nightclub and rescue this character. And what she does, they give her a 3D printed Glock 43X with rubber bullets. And the whole scene is just fantastic and really brings you in to understanding how far her training has come as she takes out these 3 henchmen and then saves this woman, which is one of the other things about this movie. They go on about the idea of her having a ward, a charge, someone she has to protect or save. And that's what ends up being what ends up being the driving force at the end. So she does have to save this woman from the nightclub, and they go through in her training early on where she has to lead somebody, through a room and protect her from danger. And that to me felt unique to a maternal female instinct. It felt unique to a character capable of being a mother, which is of course part of it because she has to go save Norman Reedus's, his character's child, it's Ella, from her grandfather who ends up being the chancellor. And there is a maternal instinct and an aspect of that storytelling that I felt wouldn't have necessarily worked with John Wick, and does seem to echo and tell us that the filmmakers understand what makes men and women different in many ways. And I thought that was some great attention to detail. But I loved the scene with the Glock 43X. There was also this one where she's fighting this woman, and I think it's a SIG gun gets stuck under a bunch of plates at the bottom. It's at the bottom of a whole stack of plates on the floor, and they're just beating each other over the head, breaking plates as they try to find this gun. And I laughed so hard when I saw that scene. It made me laugh. So the fight scenes, again, they're extensive, but they keep the pace moving. I think that they understood the things that make men and women different. They addressed it early on in her training, and I think the inclusion of her protecting a character leans into that as well. Stylistically, it's right up there with the other John Wick movies. I had a lot of fun with this one. I think you guys would enjoy it at the theater. It's only about 2 hours and 5 minutes long. It doesn't overstay its welcome. John Wick gets another great moment at the end of the film, which I won't even spoil for you, even though I did do more spoilers at the beginning. But I think this movie is worth checking out in theaters. Only 205 minutes, only 2 hours and 5 minutes. A lot of fun. Check it out. Let me know down below, guys. What did you think about this movie if you saw it? What is your favorite of the John Wick movies in the franchise? And what did you think of The Continental? I got through one episode and I turned it off. I think there's something about seeing these movies on the big screen that really makes it even more visceral and fun to me. So let me know down below what's your favorite out of all of them. And if you don't know what it is, guys, Pop Culture Crisis is the podcast. Me and Mary are live Monday through Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is, of course, noon Pacific. You should join us. See you there, guys. Thanks for watching. Listen to full episodes of Pop Culture Crisis on Spotify.
Keep up with us on social media and make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the show. Bye, guys.